Let's get right to Trey Yingst, live on the ground in Israel with the latest. Trey, what do you have?
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. Right now you can hear the buzz of an Israeli drone overhead. Israeli forces are picking out their next targets along the Gaza Strip. They continue to hit different Hamas positions, and we are learning that overnight a deputy commander of the rocket launching unit from Hamas was killed in an Israeli airstrike overnight, a significant development as the leadership of Hamas continues to be targeted by the Israelis. We do know the death toll inside Gaza has now reached more than 4,600 people. That does include civilians and militants alike. This all comes as anticipation is growing around that expected ground offensive to be conducted by Israel into Gaza in the next hours or days. The destruction along the border is significant. And again, the rocket fire into the southern and central part of Israel continues. We brought to you last hour as those air raid sirens were sounding just to the southwest of Jerusalem. I do want to draw your attention to the northern border, where overnight the Israelis conducted airstrikes in southern Lebanon, following more anti-tank guided missiles that were fired toward Israeli positions. Also, we've seen rocket fire targeting northern Israel and the evacuation of 12 more communities along the border. A real anticipation about a new front that would include ground operations there in Lebanon and, of course, the West Bank, that third front that is opening up. We saw earlier in the week the city of Tulkarm was the site of an Israeli strike, 13 Palestinians killed. And overnight, you can see that at a mosque, there were reportedly Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters that were targeted in an Israeli airstrike. Guys?
Trey, I have a question on this commander that was targeted and killed. We've seen many headlines of specific battleground commanders being targeted, being taken out in Gaza. We hear that many of the leaders of Hamas are in other countries. When we talk about the structure of Hamas, I know with the Taliban, taking out a commander meant something sometimes because the lower level leaders didn't have the military training, didn't have the larger scale plan. Is Hamas structured that way, or are they structured more like us, to where if you take out a commander, somebody takes their place, the battle keeps going?
Yeah, exactly. The latter. We've talked with people inside Gaza before about the command structure of both Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And I remember having this conversation back in 2019 when the Israelis used a targeted assassination to take out Baha Abu Alata, an Islamic Jihad rocket commander. And I asked another commander in Gaza, what happens now? And he simply said, we'll just replace him. Yeah. And that's exactly what takes place. When one commander is taken out, they will just replace him with the deputy of that commander. So this is a continuing cycle, and part of the reason Israel wants to go in on the ground to take out the entire chain of command and destroy all of the Hamas and Islamic Jihad weapons.
You know, Trey, you've said for a while that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when as far as the invasion into Gaza. And that appears to be the case. So let's take that as a given that it's going to happen eventually. And Hezbollah has said, if you go into Gaza, we're getting involved. Is it then a foregone conclusion in your mind that this is going to be a two-front war no matter what? I mean, is there really any way that Israel avoids a northern front when it goes into Gaza?
Look, that's what the Israelis are bracing for, and not just two fronts, but many fronts, understanding that proxies in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq get involved, even direct fire from Iran. But what we should note is sort of this unconventional idea, and it's something we've been asking officials about, and we're not getting a lot of information. Obviously, this is very sensitive, what we're talking about. But we do assume, according to the people we've talked with, there will be a ground offensive into Gaza. There's nothing that indicates the Israelis couldn't do another major strike first, such as hitting Hezbollah in southern Lebanon before entering Gaza, or even striking Iran before entering Gaza. All of these options are on the table as the Israelis make a calculation about what the response will be. And when you think about the warfare tactics in all of this, they may want to take out those units that are going to respond immediately in a place like Lebanon, for example, first, before entering Gaza.
Trey, what do you know about the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza right now?
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic. Remember, there are more than 2 million civilians that live inside the Gaza Strip. There are many vulnerable elderly people, women and children that are in desperate need of medical aid and food. And that's part of the reason that you saw aid trucks entering the Gaza Strip yesterday, but it's not enough. And amid this conversation and the war that is taking place, it's critical that we distinguish between the Palestinian people and the civilians and the groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad that launched this brutal massacre on October 7th.
Trey, real quick.
I think that's a very, very good point to make. Thank you, Trey.
Real quick before we let you go, we talked about the leaflets in the introduction to this segment that Israel is dropping in Gaza, saying, listen, if you don't get out, you're considered an enemy combatant. Is it feasible for peaceful civilians to get out before this ground invasion happens?
Yes, they've been given a lot of time to move south. And remember, in those initial days, we brought you the images here on Fox and Friends, and we talked about this, how some areas were being blocked by Hamas militants. Since then, we saw people getting out of their cars and simply walking. If they want to go south, they're getting south. And so they've had more than enough time, according to Israeli officials we've spoken with, to get south. But still, we should note there are thousands of civilians in Gaza City. Some people claim they don't have the means to move. They say that they are going to stay in their homes regardless. We've talked to a variety of civilians in Gaza. And it's difficult, right? Because when especially older people are living in one place for a long time and they're told to leave, it's not as easy as just saying to leave. And so that's part of what the Israelis are going to have to deal with when they are inside Gaza. When they do make entry, they're going to be immediately engaged by militants, by gunmen who are using roadside bombs and IEDs, but they're going to be fighting amid civilian areas. And the death toll among civilians will continue to rise. There will certainly be pressure on the Israeli government to keep the civilian count as low as possible. But we're looking at an incredibly complex story and war that's unfolding here with many innocent lives in the crossfire.
Hey, Trey, real quick, staying on innocent lives. Yesterday, there was some optimism because of the news of 2 Americans released hostages. Any update, any new information on the hostage front?
Yeah, we do have some new numbers. That number is ticking up. The Israelis say 210 to 212 people are currently being held hostage inside the Gaza Strip. And if I could just talk about a story that we're going to have later for you. This morning, we traveled a bit north, the most north that we've been since this war erupted, to speak with one man who grew up in the town of Nir Oz, a place that we reported from, a kibbutz along the border. And his brother was killed on October 7th, and his father was taken hostage. And I asked about his father, and he said, my father was a peace activist. He's a man of peace. And he actually helped Gazan children to take them to Israeli hospitals as part of a program. He was making art in protest of violence against Palestinians, and yet these militants still dragged him into the Gaza Strip and are holding him hostage. And I think that gives you a sense of how indiscriminate these attacks were. They killed everyone they could and took as many hostages as possible.
We look forward to that. I mean, we don't look forward to it, but thank you for bringing us that report.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing we need to understand. Trey Yingst, live on the ground in southern Israel.
Excellent.
Stay safe.
Thank you, Trey.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.